Okay, so this morning we're going to talk about reports because everyone was interested from the poll to look at how reports should be written. The week before we looked at sort of writing essays, and for writing reports, this is going to be for part two. Okay, for part one, it's always necessary to write an essay. And for part two, you've got a choice of different formats here. And we can see here, it could be, you could write a report, a proposal, which is very similar, a review, or perhaps even some sort of communication like a letter or an email, okay? So we're gonna have a look at reports today and see what's sort of required for such things, okay? If you look in the Cambridge website, there is a handbook for teachers where they talk about different sort of aspects of the exam, and specifically for writing, they make a comment here about reports. And essentially here you can see that the report is going to be for someone who is a superior. It could well be a boss or a manager, okay? But it could also be for a particular peer group, for example, club members or colleagues of a particular club, okay? So essentially report is going to be something quite concise. Okay, it's written for a particular purpose, a reason, but there's also written for a particular group of people or person, okay? So essentially in the report, you want to try and present the information necessary in a sort of clear, concise, easy to read sort of way, okay? And it's going to be something which is going to be factual, okay? So we're going to have a quick look at that. Essentially, it's going to be written formally, in personal sort of style, and there will be a particular structure that the examiners will be looking for. They will be looking for a particular title that sort of explains very quickly what the report is about. There will be a short introduction. The main part of the report will be within the paragraphs, and perhaps you might have sort of 2 or 3 sort of different sections here. And again, there will be sort of subheadings for those sections. And at the end, you'll be expected to write some sort of recommendation or perhaps a conclusion, okay? Now, within this sort of structure here, we've talked about a title, we've talked about subheadings. It's also necessary, if you want to, you can also use bullet points, okay? And we'll have a look at those in a minute. And they're very sort of easy ways of presenting information, again, in sort of quite a quick and easy sort of way to read them. Okay, so formal writing, again, like in essays, so no contractions, no informal language, okay. Careful use of phrasal verbs. There are some phrasal verbs that can be used, but if you're not too sure, what they call Latinate verbs, verbs that essentially come from the Roman sort of kinds of languages. Passive structures, you could also think about using, and the tone and the register of the what you write will be something that they will certainly look at, okay? So let's have a look and see what we can sort of write for each different section. So we're definitely going to have a title. There's definitely going to be some sort of introduction, sort of a very short 2-line, maybe 3-line introduction. And basically you're going to explain why the report is being written, okay? There is certain language requirements that you could use here that it sort of explains in the introduction. So the aim of the report, purpose of the report, okay? The report is intended to evaluate, to show, okay? So sort of some expressions that could be used here, okay? Now, the main part of the report is going to be your sort of perhaps 2 or 3 sort of different sections, okay? And it's probably necessary to hear that you should use sort of subheading so that people reading the report can look quickly and say, well, look, that's interesting, I'm going to read that. They don't have to read through sort of a whole, 20, 30 lines of information to get the information they want. They want to be able to read something quickly and get the information without too much effort, okay? So maybe in the main part here, it's necessary to talk about where the information comes from. Okay, you might be asked, and you might need to sort of provide information about the sort of report. And it may well be that you have to talk about your experience, but it also could be that you need to talk to particular kinds of people. If you're a member of the club, you might need to talk to club members about certain things that they're interested in. So you might need to sort of explain at the beginning where the information comes from. Okay, you could present perhaps a questionnaire to people, which they fill in. There could be a survey where you ask people certain questions. So at the beginning, sentences like this might well be necessary. Okay, more than a half of those questioned considered that the facilities were not adequate. Okay, if you're giving sort of personal sort of experience, having spent 6 months working here, I can state that the facilities are not adequate. We can say here, a small proportion of the shopkeepers in the town surveyed mentioned that the roadworks were a considerable burden, etc. Okay, make sure whatever you do in this sort of information here, it's relevant directly to the question that's being asked. Okay, it may well be necessary that you need to sort of present certain sort of information like we have here. Again, using sort of these connecting words like firstly, secondly, and thirdly is something that you could also sort of think about using. Okay, this will be an example here of bullet points. Okay, these are bullet points, and you can see here that they're sort of not sort of full sentences. It's just providing sort of very sort of easy to access information. Okay, you don't have to use them, but if you want to, I think sometimes they're sort of quite useful. And at the end, you're expected to provide some sort of conclusion or recommendation. So that essentially the people reading your report, they may well read the sort of title and the introduction, and then go straight to the conclusion to find out what the conclusions are. If it's of interest what you've written in the conclusion, well, perhaps then they then go to the main part of the report to find a bit more information and to find out more detail, which is the reason really for sort of having headings and subheadings, okay? And again, we can see here there's certain sort of language that could be used to present this, the information in your conclusions or recommendations. Okay. At the end, I've mentioned here very quickly a sort of a difference between a report and proposals. Typically in part 2, you might well see that there are different options. Reports are very common, proposals are very common. They are slightly different. Okay. And essentially a report is something that talks about what has been done. Okay, what has happened. So essentially looking back in the past. Okay. A proposal is something which hasn't happened yet. And so you're providing information about what might happen in the future, okay? So there is a slight difference in the language that might be used, okay?